motion for return 19, Mr. McIver.
The honourable member for Calgary Hayes.
Wait for you go first. Yeah. I think the government goes first, don't they?
Yes. Yep. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Honourable Government House Leader, I just need the honourable member to move first, and then I can address you.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'm moving motion for return. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I appreciate that. That reads copies of all policy documents and recommendations prepared by Alberta Community and Social Services or its predecessor between January 1st, 26th and August 1st, 2017 in connection with the development of the qualified list as referenced in the Service Dog Qualifications Regulation, ELTA Regulation 9059/2017.
Thank you, honourable member. The honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I would wish to inform the House that the government was going to recommend rejecting motion 19. The reason primarily, Madam Speaker, is that it is a request for recommendations to the Minister that the Minister received and considered before making his decision, and as such it's excluded, or it's an excluded category under the Freedom of Information and Privacy Act, Madam Speaker, so the government is recommending rejection.
Thank you, honourable member. Are there any other members wishing to speak to the motion? You've already moved the motion, honourable member. You can close, but if there's any other members that would wish to speak first.
What?
The honourable member for Rocky Mountain House Hudson.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. I think the honourable member from Calgary Hayes did not quite understand what's going on there because of the confusion, but I will attempt to stand in for him. It's interesting to hear.
Well, I will close later.
The government's comments. Actually, you know what? I think that the Alberta Regulations 59/217 is the Service Dogs Qualification Regulations. The document requested by the honourable member from Calgary Hayes will aid in answering many questions such as some of these. Section 1, subsection 2 requires that the Minister establish a qualified list of accredited organizations to provide service dog training in Alberta. Since then, 12 organizations have been accredited and are listed on the government's website. So, Madam Speaker, how did the Minister develop the training standards in subsection 2B? Did the training standards meet the national and international standards? Seems like a reasonable question. How many of the 12 organizations on the current qualified list have been performing service dog training prior to the province announcing it would create this list? How many organizations actively trained service dogs prior to Alberta Regulations 59/217 applied and did not qualify for the qualified list? Is there an appeal process? Do organizations seek accreditation for the qualified list need to display a track record of successful training and partnership with clients? Organizations are required to include proof of incorporation in their application for the qualified list. Is that information made available to the general public? In Section 1, subsection 5 states, the Minister shall publish and maintain a qualified list and the training standards referred to in subsection 2 as the Minister considers appropriate. What was the Minister's rationale for including the 39 specific qualifications outlined in the Alberta Service Dog Qualification Assessment? And according to subsection 5, the 39 assessments exercised are those the Minister considers appropriate. Were there some deemed not appropriate? Another reasonable question. And what consultation was involved to create the qualification assessment list? Was any consideration given to provide flexibility for the list for the service dogs assisting with unique conditions? If so, how is that reflected in the 39 qualifying exercise? The mitigation tasks are blank. Does that mean there are at the discretion of the assessor? And what kind of medical information is required by assessors to determine if the service dog is able to meet the needs of the person it is assisting? Seems like lots of reasonable questions, which is why the Honourable Member for Calgary Hayes has brought forward a motion for return, which is number 19. that doesn't basically says copies of all policy documents and recommendations prepared by Alberta Community and Social Services or its predecessor. Reason he has to add its predecessor is because, as you know, the Premier had to split the ministry in two when the government fumbled the Serenity file. But what the honourable member is looking for is from both those departments now, between January 1st, 2016 and August 1st, 2017, in connection with the development of a qualified list as referred in the Service Dog Qualification Regulations, Alberta Regulation 59/2017. All of us in this House have heard from people associated with both training of service dogs and people with needs for service dogs, and some of the frustrations that surround getting dogs at appropriate times, and some of the issues that are around that. I think we all also know how important it is for people who ultimately are able to obtain service dogs to help them in their everyday life. I don't have much experience personally with service dogs, but I do remember when a former leader of the opposition, a former leader of the Legacy Party that I belong to, Heather Forsyth, a longtime cabinet minister in this place, had a service dog, and the members that were back in the 28th legislature will remember Quill. In fact, Madam Speaker, it had its own Twitter account, which before I was an MLA, I would follow Quill's Twitter account. Fascinating to me. It seems that Quill always interpreted the day very different than the members of the Assembly. But that service dog helped my good friend Heather Forsyth be able to hear. She had some trouble with hearing, and it made her, it still does, Quill's still around. I saw Quill not too long ago. Pretty cute dog, actually used to sit on this chamber floor to help that honourable member as she did her work. And we hear stories like that all the time, and I think that it's important that the members brought these questions forward. I suspect when he closes debate, he will have more to say about that, but I think it is disappointing that the government will not cooperate with such a simple request for information on, well, really, I can't see this being a partisan issue that the minister would want to not provide accurate information to this House. It seems to me the government House leader's argument was that the minister does not have to provide this information because it was provided to the minister as advice. Well, I don't think that's fair. And I do think that the government House leader could still provide that to this House, even if there is a rule that would allow him not to. I'm not sure. I'd have to check into that. But I certainly think that he could if they so chose. And one would have to ask why they would not want to talk about something as simple as this. And hopefully somebody over there will explain why as this debate progresses.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Are there any other members wishing to speak? The Honourable Member for Fort Saskatchewan, Bakerville.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I hear that the Honourable Member is asking many good questions. However, as I understand it, there doesn't seem to be any reason that asking for these briefing documents would bring any of the further information that he is requesting. However, I am sure, and as I understand it, that he would be able to submit these things as written questions. And I do believe that if he were to submit them as written questions, that they would produce many of the answers that he is, in fact, seeking out. So thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Are there any other members wishing to speak to the motion? The Honourable Member for Grand Prairie Smoky.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Yeah, I'd like to take a moment to talk on this too, and I guess I thought it was kind of interesting that the member opposite suggested the reason they can't answer this question is because it's excluded from FOIP and by FOIP, and so that's kind of the point of the operation here is to get information, to provide some clarity on different things going on in government, and so to use that excuse I thought was kind of maybe a little bit strange, but whatever excuse they want to use, I guess they can. But when I was kind of looking through this to myself, I think there's a lot of questions that we could answer by having this information, and I think the member from Rocky Mountain House, Sundry, had mentioned some of the things that the questions that could be answered had we had this information. But when I kind of looked through here myself, I looked at the regulation itself, and it says qualifications under qualifications, it says the dog has qualifications of a service dog for the purposes of the Act if A, the dog has successfully completed a training program delivered by a school or institution that is accredited by or that has candidacy status with Assistance Dogs International, Inc. Or the dog has successfully completed a training program delivered by an organization identified on the qualified list referred to in this section, or a test administered by an organization identified on the qualified list referred to in this section. So, Madam Speaker, there's some guidelines, I guess, there that, and those guidelines don't necessarily answer the questions that we would like to find here today. But if the government would provide these documents and the recommendations, then we would know exactly, what process was used to get to this point. Now, it goes on to talk about a qualified list here under qualifications under Section 2. The minister shall, by order, establish a qualified list and the training standards that must be met for an organization to be eligible for the qualified list. So then it brings up these training standards, and that was one of the questions we had as far as the training standards. Where did they come from? Who helped make recommendations, and how did this all come about? Now, when I look at the training methods that the list that's created here on the government's website here, training methods and standards for dogs, and of course this is the information that we'd be looking for, is the documents and recommendations prepared by the Alberta Community and Social Services or its predecessor between January 1st, 2016 and August 1st, 2017 in connection with the development of the qualified list as referred to in the Service Dogs Qualifications Regulations. So, getting back to the training methods and standards for dogs that the government has listed on its website, it says, 1, the organization uses training methods to support the ethical and humane treatment of service dogs that do not cause fear, pain, or other negative responses in the dog. For example, no shock collar, prong collar, or similar equipment is to be used in the training or testing of a service dog. And number 2, the organization has a service dog training or testing program that ensures dogs that are trained or tested meet the following standards. And so it goes on to talk about health, public appropriateness, behavior, basic obedience skills, advanced skills, and but under health, and these again, this is under the training standards that the Alberta training standard that the government has listed here. Health, the dog is between the age of 18 months and 9 years old, has current vaccinations, has been spayed if female or neutered if male, have an operating microchip that is a full duplex type conforming to ISO standards. And so that's on the health end of things. And then under public appropriateness, are clean, well-groomed, and do not have an offensive odor. Of course, that would be pretty valuable if you have your dog in public. Toilet only in appropriate circumstances and locations, also good if you're in public. Display a jacket, cape, harness, or other equipment to indicate that it is a working animal assisting a person with a disability, and present as healthy and able to work. Now on to behavior. Number 1, do not solicit attention, visit, or annoy any member of the general public. Do not disrupt the normal course of business. Do not vocalize unnecessarily, barking, growling, or whining. Show no aggression towards people or other animals. Do not solicit or steal food or other items from general public. Work calmly and quietly in a harness or leash, or able to perform tasks in public without showing distress or avoidance, or able to lie quietly beside the handler without blocking aisles, doorways, etc. And also stay within 24 inches of their handler at all times unless the nature of a trained task requires them to be working at a greater distance. And now, Madam Speaker, my wife actually has been working in childcare for some years now, actually pretty much her whole life, and she retired from that just this year. And she decided that she was going to take up volunteering for search and rescue. And of course, we both have a love of dogs, and particularly we like Jack Russells. And right now we have a Jack Russell German Shorthair Pointer Cross, which of course is a high energy dog, and but pretty intelligent actually. And so that kind of interested my wife as far as maybe a search and rescue dog and the training that it would take to do that. And now I wish I would have paid a little closer attention when she was talking to me the other day and explaining to me the process to be able to have a dog trained for search and rescue. but I know it was very extensive. In fact, I think it even took a year or two of working with somebody that had a trained dog as a helper kind of thing in order for you to be able to handle your own dog on your own. And I know the training was extensive for the dog, and I know the training for the handler was extensive too. And so we have a situation here where we have these guidelines here for these dogs, these service dogs, and we know, like I say, I've heard how extensive the training is to have a search and rescue dog, and what that the handler and the dog has to go through, and so it's interesting to see the guidelines for what the government has here, and I think that's why we would like to see these documents and these recommendations, so that we would know exactly how the government came up with this list. Now, I'll go back to the list of what the dog has, the requirements for the dog, and under basic obedience skills, the dog is able to demonstrate mastery of basic obedience skills sufficient to support a disabled person having public access with that dog. Able to focus on the person with a disability despite distractions such as children running, loud noises, flashing lights, traffic, and presence of food, balls, toys, or other attractants. I know one thing about Jack Russells: if you throw a ball out there, then the chances are that's going to take the attention of the dog. So obviously the service dogs can't have that issue. Have prompt recall directly to the handler. Respond to commands 90% of the time on the first command in all public environments. Exhibit good canine citizenship and be able to demonstrate that the dog is safe to be in a public setting. And of course, advanced skills, which of course I think a lot of these things that we've discussed here so far are fairly basic for a dog to have in public. And advanced skills: have mastered the basic obedience skills set out above, are capable of performing 3 or more tasks in order to mitigate aspects of the handler's disability, i.e. performing specific tasks which a handler is unable to do themselves due to their disability. Have received a minimum of 240 hours of advanced training. So that's a fair number of hours there for advanced training. So, Madam Speaker, again, we go back to this motion for return, and how the request is fairly simple: policy documents and recommendations prepared. And so I don't feel that there should be a big issue with providing this. I don't think this is anything that would be out of the ordinary to provide. This should be. There's nothing to hide here from the public or from the opposition here. This should be nonpartisan. And the excuse that it's excluded from FOIP, so we're not going to do it, I don't think is really a justifiable answer as far as being able to answer some of these questions. So we don't know, so we don't know what consultation was involved to create the qualification assessment list. We don't know, is there any consideration given to providing flexibility for the list for service dogs assisting with unique conditions? We know that these dogs could have a variety of, that the person that these dogs are for could have a variety of disabilities. And so we don't know what kind of flexibility was allowed for that list on that. And and also, what kind of medical information is required by assessors to determine if the service dog is able to meet the needs of the person is assisting? So, when we look at these training methods and the standards for the dogs, I think we need to be sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Are there any other members wishing to speak to the Honourable Member for St. Albert?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So today is International Day of Persons with Disabilities, and so I'm thrilled to stand up and speak to something that is sort of peripherally related about service dogs. I don't know about you all, but when all of this came out quite some time ago, I read through all of the lists and information that you just proceeded to go through. So I am happy to talk about service dogs any day of the week. I do so in St. Albert, I do so online, I do all the time, and we talk about it. I understand, I've gone to see the organizations that work. I know what the testing standards, as do we all, because we actually understand this information. So I'm kind of left with, what are you doing? So I get the feeling sometimes that on Mondays when it's supposed to be private members' business and we need to talk about really important things other than what your question is and your ability to run the clock out, talk about bills like private members' bills that address hate groups that want to register in Alberta. So I just wanted to stand up and say I think service dogs are vitally important. I always have. I'm amazed and I'm thankful for the work that we've done. I know we're going to continue to do the work. I know we have lots of work to do in the future. So I hope we can wrap this up and move on to some private members' business, which is what Monday afternoons are all about. Thank you.
Are there any other members wishing to speak to the motion? Seeing none, I will call on the Honourable Member for Calgary Hayes to close debate.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate the introduction from the previous speaker. And as is usual here, the previous speaker is wrong about almost everything she said. Starting with the fact that she's talking about the opposition bringing this item together on a Monday and making suggestions about why that is. But it occurs to me that if I shuffle through my papers here and find these standing orders for today, that this is actually due last week. So as it turns out, it was the government's decision to do this today. So the main complaint by the member across is entirely unfounded. So the government has, and of course, when you file a motion for return, I'm not sure that, I can tell you that and I'm not sure anybody does, looks at what day it will come to the House. You have a question, you ask, and it comes when it comes. So the honourable member is completely unfounded and off base, but that's not a surprise. But what she was right about is this is the International Day of People with Disabilities, and that's kind of apropos, really, that we should be talking about service dogs today, and I'm proud to have raised this important issue. Now, as my honourable good friend and colleague from Rimby Rocky Mountain House Sundry pointed out, there was a member in this house at one point that had a service dog, and certainly I became somewhat acquainted with that, and other people with service dogs too. But it's also appropriate to raise it today, Madam Speaker, because it wasn't very long ago that in the Legislative Assembly that a person was not allowed to be in here with their service dog, and the only thing I'll say about it is acknowledge that my understanding is that there's legal proceedings on that right now as a result of the person not being able to stay in here, which is probably another good reason to have a discussion about this. So I won't be talking about that particular case. That would be inappropriate. But the fact is, what you have is a government House leader stating that he won't give the information because he doesn't have to, and you got a government backbencher saying everybody knows. Well, if everybody knows, then the government of the backbencher should probably be pushing the minister to say release the information that everybody knows. Now, the honourable member had her turn to speak, but she's not done yet, so perhaps we'll hear more at another time. So there's several questions here, and some of my colleagues, Madam Speaker, touched upon those, and they're legitimate questions. Because when this thing came forward, I think it's fair to ask how the minister developed the training standards and whether indeed those training standards meet the national and international standards. Because of course people with training dogs, like the rest of us, live their lives when and where they want to, and if they travel from province to province, it would be certainly convenient if the standards were the same across the country and internationally, and that would have been a simple question for the government to answer, and they had the opportunity, but they chose not to. And again, how many of the 12 organizations on the current list have been performing service dog training previous to the government announcing that they were going to create the list? So in other words, it's a legitimate question. How many of those operators are long-time professional, experienced operators that are just registering now it's time to register, and how many started in the business? It could be 0, it could be 12, I don't know, just because the government was creating the list. Another legitimate question might be that we would have hoped to, with the communication between the government and others on this, know of the 12 organizations. Do they all train the dogs themselves, or do some ship the dogs out to somebody else or subcontract someone else to train those dogs? Now, if they're supposed to be qualified, it's a legitimate question about whether they would actually send the dogs out somewhere else and train them themselves. But the government so really the question that the honorable backbencher from the government asked what is there to know? I guess the question I would say is, what's there to hide is the real question here. When there's when the government backbencher is claiming that everything's so simple and well known, and yet the government won't disclose it, one really has to ask, Madam Speaker, what indeed, if anything, does the government have to hide? And of course, when they refuse to give any information, we can't answer that question. So, again, organizations, do they display a track record of successful training and partnerships with clients? How often does the government check in upon them? What was the government's motivation for making the rules that are there? And another question that one of my colleagues asked, and I think it's a fair one too, is how much health information is asked of the person that needs and requires the service dog? And one would think that primarily they would only need to know the fact that they qualify for a service dog. So members of the House and the government.
Thank you, Honourable Member. The Honourable Member for Calgary Hayes has closed debate for motion of return number 19. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. And the motion is defeated and division has been called. Called on motion for return number 19 as moved by the Honourable Member for Calgary Hayes. All those in favour, please stand.
Mr. McIver, Mr. Nixon, Ms. Goodrich, Mr. Hunter, Mr. Lowen, Mr. Hansen, Mr. Dreeshen, Mr. Orr. All those opposed, please stand. Honourable Mr. Carlier, Honourable Minister Phillips, Honourable Ms. Ganley, Honourable Minister Mason, Honourable Minister Ceci, Honourable Minister Hoffman, Honourable Minister Larrabee, Honourable Minister Miranda, Mr. Rosendahl, Mr. Coulihan, Ms. Babcock, Ms. Payne, Ms. McKittrick, Mr. Shepherd, Ms. Littlewood, Member Cortes Vargas, Mr. Westhead, Honourable Mr. Schmidt, Honourable Mr. Malkinson, Honourable Mr. S. Anderson, Ms. Goring, Mr. Paquette, Mr. Sucha, Mr. Hinckley, Ms. Woolard, Mr. Kleinstuber, Mr. Dang, Member Drever, Member Turner, Mr. Nielsen, Mrs. Schreiner, Member Connolly, Member Loyola, Ms. Renault, Ms. Fitzpatrick, Member Carson, Mr. Horn.
Madam Speaker, total for the motion 8, total against 37.